Letters from a Living Dead Man by Elsa Barker. Read for you by BlueFriend in beautiful BC. Part 4. Letter 19. A Little Home in Heaven. I have met a very interesting man since I last wrote to you. He's a lover who, for 10 years, waited here for his love to come to him. They said on earth that he was dead, and they urged her to love another, but she could not forget him, for every night he met her soul in dreams. Every night she came out to him here, and sometimes she could recall, on waking, all that he had said to her in sleep. She had told him that she would not delay long in the sunshine world, but would come out to him in the self-lighted world. Only a little while ago she came. He had been long getting her ready for her coming, and had built in the substance of this world a little home he had planned to build for her in the outer world. He told me how one night, when she came to him in dream, she said that she would rejoin him on the morrow, never to leave him again. He was startled, and would almost have stayed her, because he had died a sudden and painful death, and he dreaded pain for her. Always he had watched over her, warning her of danger, but this time he felt, after the first shock of the message was over, that she was really coming, and he was very happy. He had found no other love out here, for when one leaves the earth full of a great affection, and when the earthly loved one does not forget, the tie can hold for many years unweakened. You on the earth have forgotten so much of what you learned here that you do not realize how your thought of us can make us happy. You do not realize how your forgetfulness of us can throw us back entirely upon ourselves. Often those who go farthest here, who really grow in spirituality, are those whose loves have forgotten them on earth, but it is sad to be forgotten nonetheless. It is a bitter power you make possible to us when you thus throw us back on ourselves, and not all souls are strong enough or aspiring enough to make use of the lonely impetus that might help them to scale the ladder of spiritual knowledge. But to return to my lovers, all that day he remained near her. He would not rest, for as I have told you, we generally rest a little when the sun shines on the earth. All that day he remained near her. He could not see her body, for the rays of sunlight were too strong for him. But after hours of waiting, suddenly he felt a hand in his, and though she was invisible to him, yet he knew that she was here. And he spoke to her, using such words as he would have used on earth. She did not seem to understand. He spoke again, and still she did not answer. But he knew from the pressure of her hand that she realized his presence. So, hand in hand, they stood there in the darkness of the sunlight, the man able to speak because of his long experience in this world of subtle sounds, the woman speechless and bewildered, but still clinging to his hand. When the sunshine went away, he was able to see her face, and her eyes were wide and frightened, but still she seemed held to the room in which lay the body which she had been. It was summer, and the windows were open. He sought to draw her away into the perfumed night, which to them was day, but she held his hand and would not let him go. At last he drew her away a short distance and spoke to her again. Now she heard him and answered him. "Beloved," she said, "which is I? For I see myself, I feel myself, back there also. I seem to be in two places. Which I is really I?" He comforted her with loving words. He was still afraid to caress her, for the touch of souls is very keen, and he feared lest she should go back into the form which seemed to be so near them, and thus be lost to him again. But though she had often come to him in dreams, it had not been so vividly as this time, and he felt that she had really passed through the great change. She still clung to his hand, yet seemed afraid to go without him, out and away from it. He stayed with her all that night and all the next day, when the darkening sun came again, and again he could not see her. Once the well-meaning friends of his beloved disturbed her body, doing those sacred offices which seem so necessary to the living, but which may sorely disturb the dead. He stayed with her this second night, and all the second day. He could hear the sobs of her grieving parents, though they could not see either him or their daughter. But on the second night, the little dog of his love came into the room where it lay, the room in which their two souls still stood, and the little dog saw them and whined piteously. The man could hear it, and she also could hear it, and now she could hear him more plainly when he spoke to her. "Where will they take it?" she asked him. He recalled the time when he had been held spellbound near his own lifeless form, over which his loved one had shed bitter tears, and he asked her if it would not be better to come away altogether, but she could not, or thought she could not. On the third day he knew from the agitation of his love that they were placing her body in the coffin. After a while he felt, though he could not see, that many other persons were in the room, and he heard mournful music. Music can reach from one world to another. It can be heard far more plainly than human voices, which generally cannot be heard at all, except by the trained listener. By and by his love was sorely agitated, and he also threw sympathy with her, and they felt themselves going slowly, oh, so slowly, along. And he said to her, "Do not be grieved. They are taking it to the burial, but you are safe with me." He knew that she was much troubled. It was not for nothing that over the house of death there always hangs a strange hush, not to be explained by the mere losing of the loved one. Those who remain behind feel, though they cannot see, the soul of the one who has gone out. Their souls are full of sympathy for him in his bewilderment. The change need not be painful if one would only remember that it has been passed through before, but one so easily forgets. We sometimes call the earth the valley of forgetfulness. During the days and the weeks that followed, this lover remained with his loved one, ever trying to draw her away from the earth and from it, which had for her, as for so many, a fearsome fascination. It is said that the souls of those who have lived long on earth more easily detach, but this woman was still young, only about 30, and even with the help of her lover it was a little time before she could get free. But one day, or night as you would say, he showed her the home which he had built for her, and it was literally a mansion in the sky. She entered with him, and it became their home. Sometimes he leaves her for a little while, or she leaves him, for the joy of being together is heightened here, as on earth, by an occasional separation, but not until she was content and accustomed to the new life did he leave her at all. During the days, the habit of earthly hunger often held her, and he tried to appease it by giving her the softer substance which we know here. Gradually she became weaned altogether from the earth and the habits of earth, only going back occasionally in a dream to her father and mother. Do not disregard your dreams about the dead. They always mean something. They do not always mean what the dream would seem to signify, for the door between the two worlds is very narrow, and thoughts are often shaken out of place in passing through. But dreams about the dead mean something. We can reach you in that way. I came to you in a dream the other night, standing behind and outside the gate of a walled garden in which you were enclosed. I smiled and beckoned you to come out to me, but I did not wish you to come out to stay. I only meant that you should come out in spirit, for if you could come out occasionally, it's easier for me to go into your world. Good night. Letter 20. The Man Who Found God. There seems to be no way in which I can better teach you about this life, so strange to you, than by telling my experiences and conversations with men and women here. I said one night long ago that I had met more saints than philosophers, and I want to tell you now about a man who seems to be a genuine saint. Yes, there are little saints and great saints, as there are little and great sinners. One day I was walking on a mountain top. I say walking, for it seemed about the same, though it takes but little energy to walk here. On the mountain top I saw a man standing alone. He was looking out and far away, but I could not see what he was looking at. He was abstracted and communing with himself, or with some presence of which I was unaware. I waited for some time. At last, drawing a long breath, for we do breathe here, he turned his eyes to me and said with a kind smile, "Can I do anything for you, brother?" I was embarrassed for a moment, feeling that I might have intruded upon some sweet communion. "If I am not too bold in asking," I said, "would you tell me what you were thinking as you stood there looking into space?" I was conscious of my presumption, but being so determined to learn what can be known, if sometimes I'm too bold in making inquiries, I feel that my very earnestness may win for me the forgiveness of those I question. This man had a beautiful beardless face and young-looking eyes, but his garments were the ordinary garments of one who thinks little or nothing of his appearance. That very unconsciousness of the outer form may sometimes give it a peculiar majesty. He looked at me in silence for a moment, and then he said, "I was trying to draw near to God." "And what is God?" I asked. "And where is God?" He smiled. "I never saw a smile like his, as he answered, "God is everywhere. God is." "What is he?" I persisted, and again he repeated, but with a different emphasis, "God is." "What do you mean?" I asked. "God is. God is," he said. I do not know how his meaning was conveyed to me, perhaps by sympathy, but it suddenly flashed into my mind that when he said, "God is," he expressed the complete realization of God which is possible to the Spirit. And when he said, "God is," he meant to me to understand that there was no being, nothing that is, except God. There must have been in my face a reflection of what I felt, for the saint then said to me, "Do you not also know that he is, and that all that is he?" "I'm beginning to feel what you mean," I answered, "though I doubtless feel but a little of it." He smiled and made no reply, but my mind was full of questions. "When you were on earth," I said, "did you think much about God?" "Always. I thought of little else. I sought him everywhere, but seemed only at times to get flashes of consciousness as to what he really was. Sometimes when praying, for I prayed much, there would come to me suddenly the question, 'To what are you praying?' And I would answer aloud, 'To God, to God.' But though I prayed to him every day for years, only occasionally did I get a flash of that true consciousness of God. Finally, one day when I was alone in the woods, there came the great revelation. It came not in any form of words, but rather in a wordless and formless wonder too vast for the limitation of thought. I fell upon the ground and must have lost consciousness, for after a while, how long I do not know, I awoke and got up and looked about me. Then gradually I remembered the experience, which had been too big for me while I was feeling it. I could put into the form of words the realization which had been too much for my mortality to bear, and the words I used to myself were, "All that is God." It seemed very simple, yet it was far from simple. All that is God. That must include me and all my fellow beings, human and animal. Even the trees and the birds and the rivers must be a part of God if God were all that is. From that moment, life assumed a new meaning for me. I could not see a human face without remembering the revelation that that human being I saw was a part of God. When my dog looked at me, I said to him aloud, "You are a part of God." When I stood beside a river and listened to the sound of its waters, I said to myself, "I am listening to the voice of God." When a fellow being was angry with me, I asked myself, "In what way have I offended God?" When one spoke lovingly to me, I said, "God is loving me now," and the realization nearly took my breath away. Life became unbelievably beautiful. Therefore, I had been so absorbed in God, in trying to find God, that I had not given much thought to my fellow beings, and had even neglected those nearest me. But from that day, I began to mingle with my human brethren. I found that as more and more I sought God in them, more and more God responded to me through them, and life became still more wonderful. Sometimes I tried to tell others what I felt, but they did not always understand me. It was thus I began to realize that God had purposely, for some reason of his own, covered himself with veils. Was it that he might have the pleasure of tearing them away? If so, I would help him all I could. So I tried to make other men grasp the knowledge of God, which I myself had attained. For years I taught men. At first I wanted to teach everybody, but I soon came to see that that was impossible, and so I selected a few men who called themselves my disciples. They did not always tell the world that they were my disciples, because I asked them not to do so, but I urged each of them to give someone as much as possible of the knowledge that I had given to him. And so I think that many have come to feel a little of the wonder which was revealed to me that day alone in the woods, when I awoke to the knowledge that God is. God is. Then the saint turned and left me, with all my questions unanswered. I wanted to ask him when and how he had left the earth and what work he was doing out there, but he was gone. Perhaps I shall see him again some day, but whether I do or not, he has given me something, which I in turn give to you, as he himself desired to give it to the world. That is all for tonight. Letter 21. The Leisure of the Soul. One of the joys of being here is the leisure for dreaming and for getting acquainted with oneself. Of course there's plenty to do, but though I intend to go back to the world in a few years, I feel that there is time to get acquainted with myself. I tried to do that on earth, more or less, but here there are fewer demands on me. The mere labor of dressing and undressing is lighter, and I do not have to earn my living now, nor anybody else's. You, too, could take time to loaf, if you thought you could. You can do practically anything you think you can do. I propose, for instance, in a few years, not only to pick up a general knowledge of the conditions of this four-dimensional world, but to go back over my other lives and assimilate what I learned in them. I want to make a synthesis of the complete experiences of my ego up to this date, and to judge from that synthesis what I can do in the future with least resistance. I believe, but am not quite sure, that I can bring back much of this knowledge with me when I'm born again. I shall try to tell you, or some of you, when and about where to look for me again. Oh, don't be startled. It will not be for some time yet. An early date would necessitate hurry, and I do not wish to hurry. I could probably force the coming back, but that would be unwise, for I should then come back with less power than I want. Action and reaction being opposite and equal, and the unit or ego being able to generate only so much energy in a given time, it's better for me to rest in this condition of light matter until I have accumulated energy enough to come back with power. I shall not do, however, as many souls do. They stay out here until they are as tired of this world as they formerly were tired of the earth, and then are driven back half unconsciously by the irresistible force of the tide of rhythm. I want to guide that rhythm. Since I have been here, one man whom I know has gone back to the earth. He was about ready to go when I first found him. The strange part of it was that he himself did not understand his condition. He complained of being tired of things and of wanting to rest much. That was probably a natural instinct for rest in preparation for the supreme effort of opening the doors of matter again. It is easy to come out here, but it requires some effort to go from this world into yours. I know where that soul is now, for the teacher told me. I had spoken to the teacher about him, but he already knew of his existence. It was rather strange, for the man was one in whom I should have fancied that the teacher would have taken little interest. But one never knows. Perhaps in his next life he may really begin to study the philosophy which they teach. But I was speaking of the larger leisure out here. I wish you could arrange your life so as to have a little more leisure. I do not want you to be lazy, but the passive conditions of the mind are quite as valuable as the active conditions. It is when you are passive that we can reach you. When your mind and body are always occupied, it is difficult to impress you with any message of the soul. Find a little more time each day for doing nothing at all. It is good to do nothing sometimes. Then the semi-conscious parts of your mind can work. They can remind you that there is an inner life. For the inner life that is capable to you on earth is really the point of contact with the world in which we live. I have said that the two worlds touch, and they touch through the inner. You go in to come out. It is a paradox, and paradoxes conceal great truths. Contradictions are not truths, but a paradox is not a contradiction. There is a great difference in the length of time that people stay out here. You talk of being homesick. There are souls here who are homesick for the earth. They sometimes go back almost at once, which is generally a mistake. Unless one is young and still has a store of unused energy saved over from the last life, in going back to the earth too soon, one lacks the force of a strong rebound. It is strange to see a man here as homesick for the earth as certain poets and dreamers on earth are homesick for the inner life. This use of the terms outer and inner may seem confusing, but you must remember that while you go in to come to us, we go out to come to you. In our normal state here, we are living almost a subjective life. We become more and more objective as we touch your world. You become more and more subjective as you touch our world. If you only knew it, you could come to us at almost any time for a brief visit. I mean by going deep enough into yourself. If you want to try the experiment and will not be afraid, I can take you out here without your quite losing consciousness in your body. I mean without your being in deep sleep. You can call me when you want to make a trial. If I do not come at once, do not be discouraged. Of course, at the moment I might be doing something else, but in that case I will come at another time. There is no hurry. That is what I want to impress upon you. What you do not do this year, you can perhaps do next year. But if you are always rushing after things, you can accomplish little in this particular work. Eternity is long enough for the full development of the ego of man. Eternity seems to have been designed for that end. That was a sound statement which was given at one time. The object of life is life. I have realized that more fully since I had an opportunity to study eternity from a new angle, and this is a very good angle from which to view both time and eternity. I see now what I did not see before, that I myself have never wasted any time. Even my failures were a valuable part of my experience. We lose to gain again. We go in and out of power sometimes as we go in and out of life, to learn what is there and outside. In this, as in all things, the object of life is life. Do not hurry. A man may grow gradually into power and knowledge, or he may take them by force. Will is free, but the gradual growth has a less powerful reaction. Letter 20. The Serpent of Eternity. I want to talk to you tonight about eternity. Until I came out, I never had a grasp on that problem. I thought only in terms of months and years and centuries. Now I see the full sweep of the circle. The comings out and the goings into matter are no more than the systole and the diastole of the heart, and speaking from the standpoint of eternity, they are relatively as brief. To you, a lifetime is a long time. It used to seem so to me, but it does not seem so now. People are always saying, if I had my life to live over, I would do so and so. Now, no man has any particular life to live over, any more than the heart can go back and beat over again the beat of the second previous. But every man has his next life to prepare for. Suppose you have made a botch of your existence. Most men have, viewed from the standpoint of their highest ideal. But every man who can think must have assimilated some experience which he can carry over with him. He may not, coming out into the sunlight of another life on earth, be able to remember the details of his former experience, though some men can recall them by a sufficient training and a fixed will. But the tendencies of any given life, the unexplained impulses and desires, are in nearly all cases brought over. You should get away from the mental habit of regarding your present life as the only one. Get rid of the idea that the life you expect to lead on this side, after your death, is to be an endless existence in one state. You could no more endure such an endless existence in the subtle matter of the inner world than you could endure to live forever in the gross matter in which you are now encased. You would weary of it. You could not support it. Do get this idea of rhythm into your brain. All beings are subject to the law of rhythm, even the gods, though in a greater way than ourselves, with longer periods of flux and reflux. I did not want to leave the earth. I fought against it until the last. But now I see that my coming out was inevitable because of the conditions. Had I begun earlier, I might have provisioned my craft for a longer cruise. But when the coal and the water had run out, I had to make port. It is possible to provision even a small life raft for a longer voyage than the allotted 80 and 10, but one must economize the coal and not waste the water. There are some who will understand that water is the fluid of life. Many persons resent the idea that the life after death is not eternal, a never-ending progression in spiritual realms, though few who so object have made of an idea what they mean when they talk of spiritual realms. Life everlasting is possible to all souls, yes, but it is not possible to go on forever in one direction. Evolution is a curve. Eternity is a circle, a serpent that swallows its own tail. Until you are willing to go in and out of dense matter, you will never learn to transcend matter. There are those who can stay in or out at will, and relatively speaking, as long as they choose, but they are never those who shrink from either form of life. I used to shrink from what I call death. There are those on this side who shrink from what they call death. Do you know what they call death? It's rebirth into the world. Yes, even so. There are many here who are as ignorant of rhythm as most people are on your side. I have met men and women who did not even know that they would go back to the earth again, who talked of the great change as the men of earth talk of dying, and of all that lay beyond as unproved and unprovable. It would be tragic if it were not so absurd. When I knew that I had to die, I determined to carry with me memory, philosophy, and reason. Now I want to say something which will perhaps surprise you. There is a man who wrote a book, Thomas J. Hudson, called The Law of Psychic Phenomena, and in that book he said certain things of those two parts of the mind which he called the subjective and the objective. He said that the subjective mind was capable of inductive reasoning, that the subjective mind would accept any premise given it by the objective mind, and would reason from that premise with matchless logic, but that it could not go behind the premise, that it could not reason backwards. Now, remember that in this form of matter where I am, men are living principally a subjective life, as men on earth live principally an objective life. These people here, being in the subjective, reason from the premises already given them during their objective or earth existence. That is why most of those who last lived in the so-called Western lands, where the idea of rhythm or rebirth is unpopular, came out here with the fixed idea that they would not go back into earth life. Hence, most of them still reason from that premise. Do you not understand that what you believe you are going to be out here is largely determinative of what you will be? Those who do not believe in rebirth cannot forever escape the rhythm of rebirth, but they hold on to their belief until the tide of rhythm sweeps them along with it and forces them into gross matter again, in which they go quite unprepared, carrying with them almost no memory of their life out here. They carried out here the memory of the earth life because they expected so to carry it. Many Orientals who have always believed in rebirth remember their former lives because they expected to remember them. Yes, when I realized that I had to leave the earth, I laid a spell upon myself. I determined to remember through both the going out and the subsequent coming in. Of course, I cannot swear now to remember everything when I come into heavy matter again, but I am determined to do so if possible, and I shall succeed to some extent if I do not get the wrong mother. I intend to take great care on that point, and to choose a mother who is familiar with the idea of rebirth. If possible, I want to choose a mother who actually knew me in my last life as blank name, and who, if I shall announce in childhood that I am the same whom she knew when a young girl, will not chide me and drive me back into myself with her doubts. I believe that many children carry over into earth life memories of their lives out here, but that those memories are afterwards lost by reason of the suggestion constantly given to children that they are newly created, fresh from the hand of God, etc., etc. Eternity is indeed long, and there are more things on earth and heaven than are dreamed of in the philosophy of the average teacher of children. If you could only get a hold of the idea of immortal life and cling to it, if you could realize yourself as being without beginning and without end, then you might commence to do things worthwhile. It is a wonderful consciousness, that consciousness of eternity. Small troubles seem small indeed to him who thinks of himself in the terms of 1,000,000 years. You may make the figure 1,000,000,000 or whatever you like, but the idea is the same. No man can grasp the idea of 1,000,000 years or $1,000,000 or 1,000,000 of anything. The figure is merely a symbol for a great quantity, whether it be years or gold pieces. The idea cannot be fixed. There will always be something that escapes. No millionaire knows exactly what he is worth at any given time, for there's always interest to be counted, and the value is a shifting one. It is so with immortality. Do not think of yourself as having lived 1,000,000 years or 1,000,000,000,000 years, but as truly immortal, without beginning or end. The man who knows himself to be rich is richer than the man who says he has a certain amount of money, be the amount large or small. So rest in the consciousness of eternity and work in the consciousness of eternity. And that is all for tonight. Letter 23. A brief for the defendant. Tell the friend who is so anxious lest I do you harm by writing with your hand that that matter was thoroughly thrashed out on this side between the teacher and me before it began to take form on your side. Ordinary mediumship, where the organism of a more or less unhealthy person on earth is opened indiscriminately for the entrance and obsession of any passing spirit, good or evil, is a very different proposition from this. Here I, who was your friend in the world, having passed beyond, reach back to instruct you from my greater knowledge on this side. I am not making any opening in your nervous system through which irresponsible and evil forces can enter and take possession of you. In fact, if any spirit, good or bad, should make an attempt, he would have to reckon with me, and I am not powerless. I know now, have both remembered and been taught, secrets by which I can protect you from what is generally known as mediumship. Furthermore, I advise you never, even at the urgent prayer of those whose loved ones have gone out, never to lend yourself to them. The wanderers in the so-called invisible world have no right to come and demand entrance through your organism, merely because it is so constituted that they could enter, any more than a street crowd would have the right to force its way into your home, merely because its members were curious or hungry or cold. Do not allow it. Permission was once given, yes, but the case was exceptional and was not based on the personal desire or curiosity of anybody, not even yourself. I doubt if permission will ever be granted again. Many things have changed since I began to write with you. At first, I used your hand and arm from the outside, sometimes, as you remember, with such force as to make them lame the next day. Then, grown more familiar with the means at my disposal, I tried another method, and you noticed a change in the character of the writing. It began clumsily with large and badly formed characters, gradually becoming clearer as my control of the instrument I was using was better established. Now, for the last few times, I have used still another and a third method. I enter your mind, putting myself in absolute telepathic rapport with your mind, impressing upon your mind itself the things I wish to say. In order to write in this way, you have to make yourself utterly passive, stilling all individual thought and yielding yourself to my thought, but that is no more than you do every day in reading a fascinating book. You give your mind to the author who leads you along, rapt and passive by means of the printed page. These experiments in perfecting a way of communication have been very interesting to me. Tell your friend that I'm not a child, nor a reckless experimentalist. Not only in my last life on earth, but in many former lives, I have been a student of the higher science, giving myself absolutely to truth and to the quest of truth. I have never wantonly used any human being to his or her detriment, and I certainly shall not begin with you, my true friend and student. Nor shall I interfere in any way with your life, or with your studies and work. The idea is nonsensical. While I walked the world on 2 feet, I was never considered a dangerous man. I have not changed my character merely by changing my clothes and putting on a lighter suit. I have certain things to say to the world. At present, you are the only person who can act as amanuensis for me, This is neither my fault nor yours. The question before us is not whether I want the letters written, or even whether you want to write them, but whether they will be beneficial to the world. I think they will. You think they may be, and B, whose name is omitted, thinks that they are not only immensely valuable, but unique. So and so have doubts and fears. I cannot help that, nor can you. Bless their hearts. Why should they be so anxious to bolt the doors behind me? I shall certainly not try to run their affairs for them from this side. They are equal to their job, or they wouldn't be able to hold it. But this is quite a different job which I have given myself, and you have kindly consented to help me. You may not get much reward for your labor, save the shake of the wiseacres' heads and their superior smiles, and the suggestion of the more scientifically inclined that I am your own subconscious mind. I shall not be offended by that hypothesis, nor need you. Of course, you're not worried, for if you were, I could not write. Your mind has to be placid as a lake on a windless night in order for me to write it at all. Give my love to them. End of part 4.